Let's make this clear, guys. If I can compost, you can definitely compost. Hello friends, what's up? Today we're going to talk about the seemingly impossible task of composting. So we're going to talk about what is composting, how can you compost, what are some things not to compost, what can you compost, problems you may experience along the way, are they normal, what's concerning, all that jazz. So let's get into it. So composting is when you take dead plant material and you let it decompose back into nutrient-rich soil. The reason why composting is so important is because the food waste that you throw out in your kitchen, it goes to landfills, it releases methane gas. Whereas if you let it compost by itself naturally, it will actually just break down into nutrient-rich soil that you can reuse to plant more food, to grow flowers in your garden, everything like that. So it really helps reduce the amount of methane gas released in the atmosphere and just food waste in general. So I was so afraid to start composting. It was on my mind for a while and I was like, I don't know if I can do it. Will it attract bugs or bears or other animals? Is it gonna smell up the place? Am I gonna do it right? Am I gonna mess it up? Like, how long does it take? All that. I was very concerned. But then one day I was like, you know what? I got a bucket, I got some dirt, I got some food waste. We're just gonna put it all in and see what happens. Of course, I did like some research prior to that, but you basically, it's just like anything else in life. If you're afraid to do it, just do it. Like, just try it. All you can do is fail at the end, and you'll never know unless you try. So this is my compost bucket. I know it doesn't look like much, guys, but it works, and that's what matters. It may not be the prettiest or the fanciest container or whatever, but it works, and that's all you needed to do, is work. Okay, so you decided, I'm gonna try composting. Good for you. Where do you start? So first you're gonna need some type of container to hold all the compost. There are different types of composting. There is heat composting and there's pile composting. I would say pile composting is more for farmers with bigger lots of land. So I would say a lot of just everyday citizens and residents do heat composting. So all you're gonna need is some type of container. So I went to my garage and I got a bucket. I got a bucket. Depending on where you live, if you're lucky to have an outside patio or a deck, you can certainly get a bigger, larger bucket like this and leave it outside. If you don't happen to have a patio or deck, a lot of people still compost within their apartments. What they will do is they'll take their food waste and put it in the freezer, and then they'll have some type of compost kind of like bucket or very closed, more of a sealed container in their apartment and put it in like a sunny area. But a lot of people, once again, don't want to do that and they're like, it might attract bugs or something like that. It doesn't. But that's totally fine. If you don't want to commit to composting because you don't have the area or the sunny, shaded outdoor area, that's totally fine. People still take their food waste, they will freeze it over in their apartments in their freezer, and then like every Sunday they'll go and donate their food waste to a farmer that may need it that does compost. So you can totally look into community gardens or local farmers and be like, hey, if I brought you food waste, do you compost? Would you need it? And most likely they would, and they would appreciate it. So evaluate your living space. Do you have an apartment? Do you have an outside patio? Do you want to actually compost, or do you want to just help your food waste get put to a better place for someone who can compost it for you? So analyze that first. Say you have a patio or deck like myself. You're going to want to get any closed container. All you need to do is make sure it's a container and it has a lid that you can take on and off. Very simple. Think of compost as broken down into two main categories. You have your brown materials and you have your green materials. Your brown materials are carbon-based. Your green materials are nitrogen-based. Some very common brown materials are paper, dead leaves, other dirt that you can get from your yard, hay, hair. You can do your pet's hair or your own hair. Those are very common brown materials. Green materials is basically all the food waste that you would be putting into your compost. Now, the food waste that you want to avoid putting in your compost, do not put any dairy, meat. I would avoid putting eggs, onions, and garlic into my compost because I don't want any possibility of it putting out an odor. So definitely, like, I think you can put onions and garlic into it, but I read that as a beginner, they would advise against it. So I haven't put any onions or garlic or eggshells into my compost. It doesn't smell whatsoever. So I would avoid putting those things in, but definitely no meat and no dairy and no fish. So basically I filled up my bucket about halfway with dirt that I just had around my yard. Just dug up some dirt around my yard and put it in a bucket. Then I put some grass clippings in it. I put a bunch of papers that I was gonna recycle. I just plopped it in there. I have a cat, Merlin. I put some of his hair that he's been pulling out for the hotter weather in here. What else? And then I just took all my food waste and put it in there. So I filled my container up halfway with all my brown materials, some dirt, paper, hair, all that good jazz. And then I filled about 1/4 of it up with all my food waste, my green materials. So now that you have your materials, just make sure to put some type of lid on it. If you don't have like a snap lid to your container, I just used a piece of plywood and I put some rocks on it. Because once again, it doesn't have to be fancy, it just has to work. I put rocks on top of my compost lid, one, so it doesn't blow away, obviously if there's storms, but also two, I was really nervous about animals trying to break into it to get the food waste. I've not had one incident where an animal has even sniffed this bucket. And I think that's a huge point to point out, is because people are very like, oh, some animal, or it's gonna attract animals, or it's gonna smell. This does not smell whatsoever, and I have not seen a single animal even sniff it. So I'm very impressed with that. And side note, if your compost does start to smell, that means there's just an imbalance of green and brown materials. If you look at your compost and it's too wet, you need more brown materials. Throw some dead leaves in there, throw some more paper. If it's too dry, you need some more food waste. I personally, once again, have never had it smell, but I would imagine it only smells when you are lacking brown materials, when there's too much food waste building up, basically. As far as the amount of materials in my compost, I was pretty worried. I was like, it's gonna get out of hand really quickly. I don't know how much space I need. And obviously, yes, compost is all about breaking down materials, but I was still worried that like I would be putting too much food waste in and I would need more buckets and all that jazz. I've not had that experience. I filled it halfway with like dirt and food waste and everything like that. It should be a 50-50 ratio, and it's still a half bucket full. So it's amazing how it doesn't really get out of hand. It won't be like a problem that you have like 3 months down the line. You're like, oh no, I need more space for my compost. It's certainly not a thing, and I'm very happy about that. So let's talk about the problems that you might experience while you're composting. Are they normal? What to do? Everything like that. My first problem when I started composting, it didn't seem to be breaking down. It might have been because I was impatient, it was my first time composting, but I noticed that it wasn't hot enough. So one, I moved it into the sun, no brainer. But I was kind of afraid to like put it out there. I thought if it got too much heat it would smell, but once again, it didn't smell. So don't be afraid to put it in the sunlight in a nice sunny spot. And then what I did is a lot of containers are usually black for composting. So my bucket is white, so it's reflecting sun instead of absorbing it. So what I did is I was gonna paint it black, but then I realized I had black cardboard paper already like at my disposal. So all I did was cut it and I kind of just wrapped it around, and it's honestly helped a ton. Problem number 2 I had was too much sun, where I opened up my compost one day and there was like all these plants growing. And I was like, oh no, what's happening? That's completely normal. Don't freak out if you open your compost lid and there's like a whole garden in there, which I think is hilarious that, you know, you try so hard to grow other things and without even trying, your compost bucket will definitely grow something. So don't be afraid if you see little sprouts of plants. It's totally normal. You can take them out and like plant them if you want to see what they are, but they might just be weeds. So just kind of move it around and stop the growth. Problem 3 I ran into is not enough sunlight, which kind of goes back to the first one, but this was more of I left it outside, obviously, in a nice open spot to get sun, but it just so happened that it was really stormy like for a week straight one time. So I went back here and I opened it and there's mold. So there was not enough sun, it was wet, it was a dark, damp container, so it started to form mold. And I even had some food waste in my kitchen that grew mold as well. And I was like, oh no, what do I do? Looked it up. Also completely normal, guys. Don't be afraid of mold either. Mold actually helps the decomposing process. Not that I'm saying you should grow it on purpose, but if you happen to like leave your food out too much, or the bucket or container gets too wet and there's not enough sunlight, don't worry about the mold. It's totally okay. Once again, just give it a nice stir, mix it up, get some airflow in it. You're totally fine. I gotta say, those were the only big problems. Half of them were normal that I've experienced as far as composting. I once again just want to stress, guys, it doesn't smell and it doesn't attract any animals whatsoever. So I think that's a huge, like, that was what my fear was. I was like afraid, I'm like, I'm gonna attract bears or animals, it's gonna smell up the place. It doesn't. As long as you make sure it's balanced and you keep all the no materials out of the bucket, you're good. So that's it, guys. You can compost really easily. All you need is a container, some dirt, some food waste, some paper. All of the materials that you need to compost, think of it this way, are ready in your reach. You most likely have a container, you most likely have dirt, you most likely have food waste. So everything is totally within your reach, and all you're doing is helping the planet out by a bucket of dirt. So I think you guys should definitely look into it. Don't be afraid to try it. If you guys have any composting questions, leave them down below. If you've composted and you've had a different experience or a super helpful tip for some of the things that I've mentioned, leave those down below. Once again, guys, it's just something really small that you guys can do for the environment that helps out a huge amount, because there's so much food waste in America and the world, everywhere. So it just takes one more thing out of the landfill. Alright guys, that's all I have for you this week. I hope you learned about dirt. I hope I've encouraged you to start composting. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And until next week, guys, be kind and do good.